So let's build our very first React component. Now on CodePen, remember you don't have to put the HTML head body. You just start writing the body. I'm just going to put one darn element in here. I'm going to just make it a main element. Main is an HTML5 element. Is that big enough? Like a tad bigger. All right. So we know that we're going to make our components classes. I'm just going to call this app. And we'll need inheritance here, extends. In that example, you saw React.component. So React better be defined. How can we do that? Well, on CodePen, they make it pretty easy. Go to Settings. Look at JavaScript. Let you add external JavaScript. And notice this quick add section down here. Sure enough, there's React. And we also need React DOM. Cool. We also need a JavaScript preprocessor because we're going to use JSX. And JSX is not actually part of the ECMAScript spec. It's not supported directly in browsers. It may never be. It's not a proposed standard or anything. It is an extension to the language that's part of React. So we do need something that's actually going to take our JSX and turn it into normal old JavaScript. So that's called Babel. Babel is very popular, not just for React, where it's virtually universal, but it also takes ES6 and newer syntax and compiles it down to ES5 or older. Or it can take ES7 and turn it into ES6 if that's what you want it to do. But it also can process JSX, and we really need it to do that. So I'm going to save these changes. I suppose while I'm at it, I could also look and see what we have under the CSS tab here. Add external CSS. Hey, what do you know? There's Foundation. Cool. Maybe I could also add Font Awesome real quick. I happen to have the CDN link to that. Oops. On my clipboard already. There it is, Font Awesome. Paste that into Slack. All right. So now you saw I had a little red thing over here indicating an error because React wasn't defined. Now it is. So component is a class within React, and that's specifically what we're inheriting from. So the simplest possible component here needs a render function. That render function is going to return a React element. We could use React.createElement. We're not, of course. We're going to use JSX. So we need a return statement. And then we just need to return some JSX. That could be as simple as return h2 Reactrobats. And then we need to tell it that this is the element in our HTML that we're going to replace. So that's why we had to add React DOM in addition to React. Down here, we're going to say React DOM.render. And we're going to tell it what to render. So we're going to use our component now inside some JSX. And just put an empty app tag. So this becomes a React component, which means we can use it inside JSX within another component, or importantly within our React DOM render function here. So this is just going to render this element, which we know is going to render this H2. And we tell React DOM what element we want that to replace in the real DOM. So we say document.querySelector Main. It's just the name of the element, right? Simple as that. Look at that. It's on the page now. Pretty snazzy. Now this is just a one-liner. That's pretty darn boring. If we have more than one line, notice I don't put quotes or anything around this, right? JSX is just, it's JavaScript. If it's more than one line, though, we're going to need to wrap it in parentheses in our return statement. Then it'll be perfectly happy to have line breaks galore. So let's do some foundation-y stuff, I guess. At least vaguely foundation-y. Let's put a div class row being inside CodePen right now. I can't use in it. Div class equals row. Not inside JSX because class is a reserved word in JavaScript, and this is JavaScript. So we need class name, camel cased. Capitalization is significant inside JSX. So inside there, we'll put another div. I think we can minimize our HTML now. We're done with it. Let's put another little div. With its own class name of medium offset 2, just like we did before. Medium 8 columns. So we're going to have an 8 column element offset by 2. That way it'll be the middle 8, right? Because there's 2 on the left, 2 on the right. Inside there, let's put our H2. League of Acrobats. And then we'll put a form. We want to make this work just like the very simplest version of Mega Roster. You enter a name, it shows up in a list somewhere. So let's make a form. Inside this form, we'll put an input. Now notice my empty element here and down here. If it doesn't have a closing tag, you must make a self-closing tag by putting a / right before the end angle bracket, because JSX is really XML-like, not HTML-like. So you can't just have no closing tag. So empty elements have to be self-closing, and they have to dress themselves too. Their mothers are tired of doing it for them. All right. So self-closing tag there. I suppose we could use a button. We like buttons. Button type equals submit. And we'll use our fancy foundation classes for that. Let's say sign me up. So class name, expanded success button. Cool. Notice it's there. Very good. And we need some place for this to go, right? So let's make another row. Div class equals row. Uh-oh. Got a red thing. Unexpected token class. What? That the best you can give me? What's the problem? Class name. Now everything's going to be great. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. I still have a problem. What's that? That's okay. They're just CSS classes. Unexpected identifier. What's the problem? Our component needs to return a single element. It can have as many children as we want, but we can't have sibling divs here. It needs to return exactly one element. So these aren't all inside something. So if we want it to return both of these things, there's going to have to be something, some parent element that they're both inside. So that's fine. Let's take these, let's indent them. You can just use tab to indent. Now I am returning a single div. Yes, that div has 2 rows inside of it, and those rows all have all kinds of stuff inside them. This is not indented right. There we go. Get it? Need to return one element. So inside this row, we'll do another medium 8 offset 2 dealy. Just like we did before. And we'll put a UL in there. And before we use the no-bullet class to make the bullets not appear. Not bullet. No bullet. All right, great. There's nothing in the list, so there's not much to see. But it's a thing. So now the question is, how do we take what we type in there and add it to the list? React style. And by the way, in case you haven't noticed, this probably ought to be more than one component. The list should probably not be the same component as the form. But we're making this as simple as we can before we make it nice and tidy. We're just making it do something without worrying about how one component talks to another. How does a component talk to itself? How do we make something happen when we submit a form? We probably need a function to do that. I'm going to put that function right inside my app component. I'll call it add acrobat. It's going to be an event handler of sorts. So I'm going to put EV in there. Since it's going to be a submit, I'll probably need to prevent default on that. So this is just another method inside my class. Render is another one. All render does is return this right now. How do we make it do a thing? Well, as gross as this is if this were HTML in React, we do it right inside the JSX. We actually add an onSubmit to this. Now in HTML, that's onSubmit all lowercase, because as we learned, the DOM was wildly consistent when it was first designed about what was and wasn't capitalized. React and JSX are not so inconsistent. It is camel cased. On capital S submit, the other will not work. So what do we do on submit? We want it to run that function, right? This add acrobat. Well, can we do that? Can we just say this dot add acrobat? Can we put it in quotes like we would if it were in HTML? I think you know the answer. We cannot. That would be the string literal this dot add acrobat. We want the function, so we're going to have to wrap that in curly braces. Remember, this is all really JavaScript. If it happens to be a string literal, if it's a string saved to a variable and you want to pass the variable name, you still need the curly braces. But if it's a string literal, you can just put quotes. So this .acrobat seems to be a reference to a function. Is that going to work? Maybe we should do something else up here. Console log. Let's console log the event. Open up our console. Try doing it. Who we got? We got Ian right up here in front. All right, something happened. Sorry, this log was too large for our console. You might need to use the browser console instead. Fine, I can do that. Whoa. Let's try this again. All right. It doesn't say event, it says R. Interesting. Native event, event. So, It's not a regular DOM event. It's a Reactified event. Reactified. Let's see. React event. Synthetic event. So it's a wrapper around a real DOM event. So do we have a target for that or what? Event dot current target? That a thing? Yep. So it still brings some of those properties up so we can handle them the way we might otherwise. So that's not so bad. So, I want to do something with this so that it shows up in the list. I have some state that I need to maintain, my list of acrobats, like the array that we had in Mega Roster, right? So that was kind of maintaining state ourselves using an object that we just made up. But React has state as a concept built in. So we'll do it that way. So our component needs to have some state. To do that, we need to add a constructor here. So that's where we need to set it up. First things first, we need to make sure that we run the constructor that's in React component, because it does some stuff when it's initialized already. So to do that, we run super, just like you would in a lot of other languages. So that runs the constructor from the parent class, which is React component. Then we need to set up state. And state we can access through this .state. And we will just initialize it as an object with the key acrobats, which will be an empty array. I can go ahead and put a comma here if I anticipate adding something later. Not necessary, but kind of convenient. So now, what would I do inside add acrobat? Well, first let's just try console log this.state.acrobats. See what that gets us. Blah-blah-blah. Oh, explode! Cannot read property state of undefined. So this is a very common error. Cannot read property something of undefined. Always stop and think about what this means. So this means not only is there a problem on that line of code, but we know state is the thing being called an undefined. Not acrobats, but state. Which means this.state.acrobats, this, the thing that we call .state on, is undefined. What? Why? Why is it doing this to us? Why does it hate us? It just does. It's a hateful cuss. What can I tell you? So we're going to have to do something a little differently. We're going to have to bind it, aren't we? There are lots of ways that you can do this. There are lots of ways that you see people do this. One common thing, and this is actually my least favorite way, but you can do this, and you see it a lot. Some places that might be the house style. You may work for somebody that insists that you do it this way. And if so, that's fine. Do it the way your teammates do it. But we may need to go up here and just say this.addAcrobat equals this.addAcrobat.bind this. If you do that for all of your methods, then you'll know that this is bound to the right thing. It didn't even set this to the thing that fired the event. It's undefined. It's not even window. It's undefined. React. What? What are you doing? Let's see if that helps. Submit again. We got Brandon over there. All right, now I've got an empty array. So this dot state is what I think it is. Excellent. Another way we could do this, we could bind it when we call it, or when we attach the event. So we could say onSubmit equals, instead of just this add Acrobat, we could put in an arrow function of our own making, and that arrow function could call add Acrobat. This dot add Acrobat bind this. Don't need bind if you do it in an arrow function. No, that's true. Yep. If you do it in an arrow function, you don't. You could also say, though, on submit, this is what I meant to do first. This dot add Acrobat dot bind this. Just like that. Jung-un. Hit enter. Didn't have this open at the time. Let's do that again just to make sure that really worked. All right. Where? Oh, really? This doesn't show? There, how's that? Okay, that's funny. Yeah. No, so that works too. We could bind it right there when we call it. Now, I should have removed it up here to demonstrate that that actually works. So let's do it one more time. This time, who's hiding back here? That's right, Priscilla. Let's clear this to make sure we get. Okay, yes, it's still an array. So we could do it up here in the constructor. We could do it when we attach the event handler by just binding it right there inside onSubmit, or we could make an arrow function that calls it, in which case we don't need to bind because it's being called like a normal method now. Remember, it's the way that it's invoked. And once again, that worked. You dig? So take your pick. I don't care. This seems fine. All right, now we need to add it to state, right? So I think Seth said the best way to do that is to say this.state .acrobats and just edit state directly. Heck, let's just set this state equal to another thing. No, don't do that. State is immutable. So what I'm going to do, very safest way, this is ridiculously safe. Let's make a local variable called Acrobats. And let's make it a copy of the one that's in state. So we're going to use something called a spread here. We can talk more about spreads later because we'll be using the heck out of them from here on out. But it's a really easy way to copy things in ES6. And we use an ellipsis, 3 dots, and say this.state.acrobats. So what that does is it takes the items that are in this array and gives them to me as individual things. So I put those inside another set of square brackets, and it takes all the items from the one array and puts it in this one. So everything that was in this one array is now in my Acrobats array locally. So now I can push that thing onto here. Acrobats dot push. Push what? The stuff out of that input. Once again, there are a lot of ways that we could do this. The way I'm going to show you right now is using a reference. So this input here, I didn't give it a name or anything. I could have. Let's instead put this ref thing on it. Now, it's not strictly an attribute, but it looks like one. And that ref is going to be set to a function. I'm going to make a little arrow function here. The arrow function is going to receive that element as an argument. I'm going to call it input. And what I want to do then is set a property on my class. This.acrobat name will do, and I'll set it equal to this input. So now I can access that input through the property this.acrobat name from anywhere. You just kind of have to get used to some of this syntax. This is how you set a ref. So up here, I could say this.acrobat name. I know that's going to be my input. Dot value will be what I typed in there. I can push that onto my array. Now I need state to actually be updated with my new array, the contents of this array. So we know I don't say this.state.acrobats equals acrobats. I have to use this.setState. And I want to specifically set acrobats to acrobats. Key value, the value being this array right here. Now another lovely thing that ES6 gives us is a shorthand for this. We've used this shorthand when we were making methods on Mega Roster. Remember how we didn't have to say name a function, colon function thing? So this is the same idea. I can just say set state, curly braces, acrobats. Now when we're using an object literal, we tend to put spaces inside the curly braces. When we're setting the value of a prop, we don't. So this is the same as saying acrobats colon acrobats. If the key has the same name as the variable you want to assign to it, you can use this shorthand. So then I suppose I could say, well, no, that's not going to work because this is asynchronous. Well, let's just see if we get any errors. We got Tyler. Oh, don't see any errors. That seems like a victory to me. Now let's actually do something with it. So we want our list to have all the acrobats that are in state. Before we did this in a very imperative way. We said, when you submit the form, yeah, we'll push it onto the array, but we also need to build a list item. So, gosh, let's create the list item. Let's append it to the thingamadoodle. We can do that in a declarative way now. I can just tell it, this UL, I want an LI for everything that's in this array. Just automatically. Just do that for everything that's in the array. So inside JSX, inside a set of curly braces, we can put other JavaScript. That's all we're doing when we set these props. So let's see. We have this.state.acrobats. That's always going to be an array, even when it's brand new, because we put it in the constructor, right? In the constructor, we made darn sure that it's an empty array. So it will never not be an array. What if we want to do something to every item in an array? Map. So what do we want to do? We want to render some LI. Let's make a function that does that. Be real simple. But let's just wish that we had one called this.renderAcrobats. So when we name functions render something in JSX, or in React, that's a hint that it's going to return JSX. It's going to be just like our render function. Render acrobats, or render acrobat. For each item in the array, we want to render one acrobat. So let's write a function that'll do that. It's going to be real simple. All right, we have add acrobat here. Let's make render acrobat. Render acrobat. It'll receive an acrobat as an argument, because what does map receive as its first argument automatically? Remember, I don't need to put parentheses in here. You just pass the function to map, and it calls it. And it's automatically going to make the first argument to that function the item in the array. Right? It's going to call that function once for every item in the array, passing that item as the argument. So what does this need to do? It just needs to return some JSX. It needs to return a list item. What's in the list item? Well, just that Acrobat name, right? And it's the name that we pushed on, isn't it? So if I want the contents of a JSX element to be something that I have in a variable, I just use the curly brace and put the variable name right in there. It could be any JavaScript expression, really. It could be a map. It could be just the name of a variable. Could it be this easy? Let's go ahead and close our console, or make our console bigger. One or the other. All right. We have Alicia with all the consonants. What? No, not that easy. This is way easier than just doing it in JavaScript. Look how easy that was. Well, what if I need my LI to have some sort of class on it? That's probably a bunch of work I probably have to do. Class, list, add. No, just do it. Clearfix or whatever. Now we have no styles that necessitate that. But you want to throw some buttons in there? Just put it right here in the JSX. It's so easy. Mohawk can't believe how easy it is. I can tell. Jimmy, can you believe it? I can't. I'm not sure I believe it myself. Now, it's still a pain in the neck. I have to backspace over all this. So what if inside add acrobat, we want to reset the form? We could get the form as the target of the event, I suppose. Event.currentTarget.reset. Think that ought to work? I think it should. Vishal. Look at that. Holy crap, man. This is great. So there's some lines here, but an awful lot of this is really just markup, JSX, which is really JavaScript, but it looks like markup. Looks like XML. So we put an onSubmit right on this form. It calls a function. The function pushes something onto state, and that's really all it does. It doesn't worry about the list. Who cares about the list? Acrobat doesn't care. It just knows that we need to store an extra thing in our state. So it does that. And when we wrote this JSX for the UL, we tell it for everything that happens to be in that array, render another Acrobat. And render Acrobat is a one-liner. An LI with Acrobat in the middle. Dang, that's easy. So that is our first very simple React component. Now the fact that we did it in CodePen meant we didn't have to worry about a few things. We just had to make sure React and React DOM were included. Slightly more work if you want to do it locally, but not too bad. The most complicated thing is probably the fact that we said we had to run this thing through Babel, because Babel understands JSX and our browser doesn't. So we'll see how we can do something like that running it on a local machine.